Welcome to the third training movie in the Coral Finder Toolkit 2.0 training movie series. In the previous movie, we were introduced to the terminology required to use the Coral Finder and some of the tips and tricks you need to understand to get good at Coral ID. In this movie, we will explore the basic structure of the Coral Finder itself and learn the workflow for identifying branching corals. The first thing to understand about the Coral Finder is that it is not a book that you read, so much as a tool that you interrogate. It's best to think of the Coral Finder not as a book, but as a visual decision tool. The idea is that you swim up to a coral and answer a couple of simple questions on the Coral Finder's cover page. You are then sent to a page in the Coral Finder where you are most likely to find the coral's name. To do this, you need to understand the Coral Finder's structure and logic. The rest of this movie, and those that follow, show you how to use the Coral Finder to solve what are essentially visual problems. Let's get started. The cover page contains the Coral Finder key groups. Key groups are simple groupings of corals based on concepts like colony growth form. For example, branching, massive, thin plates, or columns, or the shape or patterns formed by coral polyps. For example, meandering ridges and valleys, or the lifestyle of the coral. For example, solitary, isolated, or free living. Or corals that have distinctive polyps expanded during the day. There is also one extra grouping at the bottom of the page that contains the inevitable exceptions to the rule. If you can't find the coral you are looking for, this is a good place to check. Once you choose a key group, the Coral Finder asks you questions about the wall structure, the scale of the polyps, and visible surface textures. All of these questions can be answered if you know the simple terms explained on the glossary page. Note: if you read the glossary page, you will see there are some extra terms we didn't cover in the previous movie. We will use them in later movies to solve certain problems associated with different key groups. The beauty of the Coral Finder system is that it is very visual, and it uses the least number of terms and concepts to get the job done. Most of the Coral Finder is built from Lookalike Pages. A Lookalike page contains a short list of candidate corals that match the decisions you make on the key page. Typically, you are presented with about 5 genera presented in wide, mid, and close-up view. You just scan the page for a good visual match, confirm the characters in the description, then read off the name. Note: there is also a cross-reference link to the corresponding volume and page number in Corals of the World. So let's get started, and we'll teach you the tips and tricks for each key group along the way. Grab your Coral Finder and look at the first key group at the top of the page. In the coral world, branching corals can take on many forms with almost any texture. The Coral Finder's definition of branching is broad and includes branching in all its forms, from needles, through fingers, to clubs and blades. Likewise, the scale of what is considered to be branching can also vary, from centimetres to over a metre. There is no rule book for the forms and shapes possible in the coral universe, so it is important to keep an open mind. For example, branching corals with thick blade or club-like branches may tend to look like columns. So keep the columns key group in the back of your mind. It is important to remember that key groups are concepts of convenience. In the real world, the branching key group grades into the columns key group. Another important thing to understand about corals is their capacity to mould their shape and form. The genus Acropora is a common branching coral with over 100 species. Over evolutionary time, this genus has explored almost every conceivable variation on the theme of branching, including using tiny branches to make shapes like tables and plates. Once you grasp the branchlets idea, then the branching plates of branchlets key group is very easy to use. Let's do an example. The coral in front of us is branching, so let's focus on the branching key group. Straight away, we are asked to answer a question. Does our coral have an axial corallite or not? We didn't learn about axial corallites in the previous movie, but if you look at the glossary page of your coral finder, you will see it listed. This is a term that only applies to the branching key group. The Coral Finder glossary page shows the difference between axial and radial corallites in a line drawing. But here are some examples in real life. Axial corallites are specialized corallites that occur at branch tips. They are differentiated, which means they look different from the surrounding corallites on the branch. So in this example, with two branching corals side by side, we need to know if either coral has differentiated axial corallites. Let's take a closer look. Clearly, the coral on the left does, and the coral on the right doesn't. Starting with the coral on the left, we can follow through to the Lookalike page. This one's easy. It's the genus Acropora. With over 100 species, each showing an axial corallite, this genus gets a page all to itself. Now, back to the coral on the right. It's always a good idea, and it saves time, to have a close look at the detail of the coral you are trying to identify before you use the Coral Finder. I would describe this coral as having a compact branching growth form. Up close, we can see that the branch tips are blunt and covered in corallites that are the same as anywhere else on the colony. That is, there are no axial corallites. Looking even closer, and you may want to use a magnifier to do this, we can see that the corallites are about 1 millimeter across and have a scaly texture. That should get us started. So, using the Coral Finder's logic, we go no axial corallite, corallites less than 2 millimeters, Lookalike pages 2 and 3. Now scan the pages. Page 2 looks like it has some good candidates. From testing, we know that most people usually see the best option almost instantly, such as the power of our iBrain supercomputer. Now we need to confirm the name of our coral by checking for its key characteristics and true scale. The Coral Finder's genus description has bold text highlighting the most important characters. Confirming these characters is the best way to learn. Coming back to our example coral. Stylophora looks good, but how can we be sure? Time to read the text description. Branches have blunt or slightly flattened ends. Check. Corallites small and usually with hoods. Check. Finally, we just need to confirm that the scale is correct. To do this underwater, you use the True Scale box. Now you can read off the name and its volume and page reference to Corals of the World. In summary, once you arrive at a Coral Finder lookalike page, you should use the following three-step process. 1. Closely compare your coral with the images in the Coral Finder. 2. Check for the presence of the key features bolded in the text description. 3. Check for true scale. Here's a tip. The absence of characters listed for the alternative genre on the same page can also be helpful. For example, Seriatopora has thinner, sharper branches, and Pocillopora has knobbly branch surfaces. Returning to the key page, you can see that there are other lookalike pages in the branching key group. Page 4 has corals with no axial corallite and corallites greater than 2 mm, while page 5 has corals with irregular, angular corallites and surface textures. Note how the genus Montipora occurs on both page 3 and page 5. Because corals vary so much in shape and texture, the Coral Finder creates convenient groups that capture all the coral chaos. And so if you're having trouble finding your coral, then I encourage you to jump around the system. It's okay. There are no rules you can break. See you in the next movie.